wanna love you the best that I can. See, I was wasted, and I was wasting time, till I thought about your problems, I thought about your crimes, and I stood up, then I screamed aloud. Don't wanna be part of your problems, don't wanna be part of your crowd, no. 'Cause I got a hand for you, I got a hand for you, and I wanna run with you. Won't you let me run with you? Hold my hand, I want you to hold my hand. Hold my hand, I'll take you to the promised land. Hold my hand, maybe we can change the world, but I wanna love you the best that I can. Hold my hand, I want you to hold my hand. Hold my hand, I'll take you to the promised land. Hold my hand, maybe we can change the world, but I wanna love you the best that I can. Best that I can.
Glad you're here this morning and holding each other's hand. Way to get through life, that's for sure. So we're here and we all struggle, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody struggle? I'm struggling this morning hard, people, so help me get through this. Hold my hand, get me through this. But seriously, it's been a tough morning.
Join the club.
Yes, thank you. We all struggle, and this might not be your time to struggle, but that means if you're not struggling, if your hands aren't full of something, your hands are empty for what? You give somebody else a hand. That's right, help somebody else along. So glad you're here this morning, and hopefully we're going to have some fun. What's the next one? Oh, we got a friend.
When you're down in trouble and you need a helping hand, and nothing is going right. Close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. You got a friend. If the sky above you should turn dark and full of clouds, winter, spring, summer, or fall. All you have to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. Ain't it good to know that you've got a friend? People can be so cold. They'll hurt you and desert you, and they'll take your soul if you let them. Oh no, don't you let them. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got a friend. You've got a friend. Ain't it good to know you've got a friend? Ain't it good to know you've got a friend? Oh yeah, you've got a friend.
Those words ring so true because even as friends, we try and be there, and we can't always be there. But when Jesus says, you got a friend, and all you have to do is call my name, that's real. That's what it's about. What's the next song? Shall It Be?
You can play the game, you can act out the part, though you know it wasn't written for you. Tell me, how can you stand there with your broken heart, ashamed of playing the fool? One thing can lead to another, it doesn't take any sacrifice. Oh, father and mother and sister and brother, if it feels nice, don't think twice. Just shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna work out fine if you only will. Do as I say. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be much better if you only will. You can run, but you cannot hide. This is why you know. Tell me what you plan to do with your foolish pride when you're all by yourself alone. And once you tell somebody the way that you feel, you can feel it beginning to ease. I think it's true what they say about the squeaky wheel always getting the grease. You've got to shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be just fine if you only will. What I'd like to do to you, shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be much better if you only will. You can run, but you cannot hide. This is why they know. Tell me what you plan to do with your foolish pride when you're all by yourself alone.
That's a great line. He does not end the song that way when James Taylor sings it. But I think for what we're singing and what it's about, it's such a powerful line. What you plan to do with your foolish pride when you're all by yourself alone. Without love, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate end. Alone, pride-filled, and wondering what to do. But thankfully, we've got something that's beyond even the love that the world knows. Because love is such a hard word to define, right? We're trying to define what is love. And the Bible gives us that truth and tells us that the ultimate love here, completely unattainable by our efforts. But the ultimate love was bought for us on that cross through Christ. And that's powerful stuff. Words, putting them into song, and singing them to God. Really singing them to Him and saying, this is what I believe, this is what I feel, and I want to sing to you these words, meaning what I say. As we sing these words here, they're pretty powerful words. And I want you to, you don't have to close your eyes. It helps me sometimes not to look around the old ADD boy here. If I'm going to worship, I need to kind of close my eyes and focus on the fact that I'm singing this to God. But however it works for you, I want you to be thinking about this. I'm singing these words to you, Jesus. And I mean them. I believe them. That's why I sing. That's why I sing them to you. I want you to hear them from me. Try that as we sing it through one more time.
Be
love the words on that second verse. As we're singing those, and again, you are my all in all, we can hope for that. But in reality, he's not our all the time, is he? Isn't that why we do things that are outside of what he would have us do? Isn't that why we think differently and, grumble and complain? We do that, right? If it's just in our mind. I know I do a lot. I do it in here, I do it here, and it's because he's not my all in all at that moment. I want him to be. And I know that he has done everything on his part. He fully loves me, he's fully forgiven me, and I am completely forgiven at that moment. And loved. But on my part, he's not my all in all. I have to be honest. Singing those words, what I really should be saying, I want you to be my all, it doesn't work though. The words, it's got to be pretty when we sing it, right? But the words of that second verse, when I fall down, not if I fall, when I fall down, you pick me up. When I am dry, you fill my cup. That's so true and powerful. And hopefully you know that. If you don't, hopefully we'll continue to focus on that and let that be what drives us in our Christian life. Real quick, announcements of any kind?
I was just going to say there are daily breads out there. There's quite a few, and there were new ones that I just put out this morning. So if you want something to kind of lead you in a little devotion in the morning, they're a very easy devotion. It might just be the scripture that you know, or it might be what they wrote. But feel free to take them. They're there for you guys to take, not for me to throw away. So.
All right, cool. Anybody else have anything going on that we need to know about? No? Good?
If you go over to my house, nobody robbed it. My daughter moved out, so half the furniture is gone, and mine is not back in. It's okay.
Nice. All right. Is this now? Beautiful. There we go. Now it's up. Check 1, 2. How's it going up?
Oh, I didn't put it on?
Yeah, it's going off. I don't know if the battery's done.
I just changed the battery to the cell. Just put it in the race.
There you go. Staying on now. There you go.
That sounds good.
Just kept shutting off.
Sounds good.
It's a smart microphone. It's like, do not give that guy a microphone. It's going to shut me off right off from the get-go. All right, cool. I noticed something that was fun on the way in today, by the way. It was you guys. And it's human nature, okay? It's not something, obviously, I was going to talk about because I didn't know it was going to happen. But it was fun to watch you all walk in and start towards the end of the tail of the plane that was in the way of the door and look and going, oh, there's no door there, but you kept walking. It was awesome. It's just I wanted to actually put the video camera on and tape it because there's a sermon in that. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it was hilarious to watch and then to realize, oh my gosh, no, there's an opening over there. Especially if it had things in your hands like babies, and it's like you're carrying this stuff, and we could have said, hey, no, let them know ahead of time. No, we'll just let them watch what's going on. Horrible. But it is true, human nature, it's what we do, we just get into a rut, we do the things that we feel comfortable with, what we know, on and on, right? And quite often when I get up here and I talk about this stuff, and I get, some blank stares and they're looking at me like, I don't do that stuff, and I'm like, is it just me? But I know we all do to some degree or another. How much we maybe realize it is another aspect, but we get into the rut of life, and we do things because we think that's what we're supposed to do, and it's the same with our faith. And it has always been this way, so don't feel like, oh, well, I'm so bad, and I just, I need to do better. And it's like, yeah, you're always going to be bad in some form or fashion, right? Just being honest. And you could always do better. Okay? If God were a God that was expecting us to do things in a certain way, He gives us things to do to add to our faith and to, kind of grow in that faith. But if it was always about being better, then we could always go, I'm just not good enough, I need to get better. And we would spend all of our time doing what? Focusing on how bad we are and how we should be better than what we are. And if you do that, I feel like that is not what God has called us to in the Christian life. I believe that what He's called us to is freedom in His forgiveness and in His love, that He's given us everything we need for godliness and righteousness, and that we should be free in that expression. That we should be free and say, thank you, God, that you have forgiven me and that you are working on me over time. And even as I fail, thank you that you love me in this very moment and that you're teaching me even through this. That's so important to know, because if we don't, all we're doing is twisting the thought process back to us. It's a lot like when I say, when we're taking communion and people, I say, you know, we talk about if you take it in an unworthy manner, that you know, you're not doing it right. And so what people will tend to do with communion is they'll take the bread and they'll take the cup, and what will they do? They'll hold it, and then they get very solemn. And they start, I love it when people start to talk like this. Because to me, that's like the whole Jesus thing. As soon as we talk about Jesus, it has to be, it's not Jesus, it's Jesus. Why do we do that? Well, because we're supposed to be feeling guilty, and we're supposed to be, you know, super reverent and all this other stuff. Instead of being real and going, Jesus, you know, my friend Jesus that's with me every day, I don't see you when I go, hurry. Oh, boy. I don't. Sorry, I don't. I just, you know, and you guys deserve it sometimes, right? But seriously, we don't do that, because what are we doing when we do that? It's like an act. We get theatrical. I remember watching a pastor one time, and this guy told me how great he was, and he said something about, and I was like, that was awesome. Like, that was weird to me. Like, who talks like that? Well, because we're speaking in the King James, we must pronounce our words. And I'm like, why? Why do we do that? No. How about we just be real and let life kind of move us around, and what Jesus did, move us around naturally. Be friends and love this. So, I'm going to talk about something a little bit weird today. John chapter 6. Can we call the Bible weird? Okay, but John chapter 6 is going to talk about, it says feeding the 5,000 and Jesus walks on water, but I don't even know that it's about that as much as it's about other things around it. And at one point, as we get towards the end, we're going to be talking about Jesus, and it's going to sound like we're talking about the zombie apocalypse. Weird as that is, it's going to sound like that. Why? Because Jesus starts to say, if you don't eat my flesh and you don't drink my blood, you got nothing to do with me. And at the time he spoke, let me tell you, we look at us and it's like, he's not talking about that. He's using a metaphor. The way he was speaking to them, to the people who were speaking, they were hearing the other. They were hearing him say, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they were going like, you know what? You had me up until this moment. Right? And let's watch the reaction of the people. But I want to start by, he starts in the first part of chapter 6. And I'm just going to read a little bit and then talk about it. Sometime after this, okay, so Jesus was talking to people before. Sometime after this, he crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs that he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on the hillside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. I want you to understand something as we read this. I want you to listen to who was he speaking and who is this written to. Well, of course, it's the New Testament, so who are we saying it's written to? Well, it's written to the Christians, right? Listen to what he says, a lot of his verbiage. Remember that there's a transition. It's not just Old Testament, Jesus is born, boom, everybody's Christians. Is it? Jesus comes into the world as a baby and lives amongst a Jewish nation. And he grows up in a Jewish nation. And he presents his message, the first part of his message, very much to a Jewish nation. And at one point, the Jewish nation says, no, we don't want you as our Messiah. There's that word, Jewish word. The one that God would send into the world to take away the sins of the world. The one that he promised to the Jewish nation. And the Jewish nation says, nope, we don't believe you are. We reject you. And at that point, you start to see Jesus go in a different direction. But before that time, I want you to know these words, and that's why it's so confusing to so many people. The words he speaks to a Jewish nation. It doesn't mean it doesn't have some crossover, but he's not speaking to Christians today most of the time. And so as you read this and you say, you know, Jesus is doing all these things, all of a sudden we see the Jewish Passover feast was near. Why does he mention that? Because it's pretty important, because he's talking about a Jewish nation at this point. Another thing about this story that's very important is, why is it important that he mentions the Passover was near? Where are they at the time? Jerusalem. They're in that area, right? And what happens in Jerusalem around Passover? What happens in the United States around Thanksgiving? The most traveled day in the year, correct? Very similar here, obviously more of a religious tone, but these guys were getting together as families, everybody was coming back, and most of the people would come to Jerusalem. Passover was huge because, of course, you could do it at home, but you're missing the massive event and the things that go on at the temple. So people come, and they come in droves. Now, when you think about this, if you didn't know that before, I would question the fact that Jesus fed 5,000 people out in the open. I would really question that, because that's part of what's going to happen. We're going to talk about that. He ends up feeding 5,000 people. Where did the 5,000 people come from? There's not 5,000 people hanging out in Jerusalem at that point in time on a regular basis, right? Certainly not. I mean, they may have been in the city, but they're not out walking around looking for something to do, got nothing else going on. Let's go hang out in the country and look for this guy that did all these miracles. So Jesus is out in the countryside, and all of a sudden he's near the Sea of Galilee, right? And all of a sudden, these people start to come. And they come in droves. Now, why did he say they came? They were here for the Passover, but they heard about or saw what? His miracles. He was healing sick people. And so they were coming out to see this guy that could do these awesome things. So keep that in mind. And this is what's going on. They're giving us the background of the story. So in verse 5, he says, when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy the bread for these people to eat? Now please, someone's writing a story here, so they're making it. Do you think Jesus looked over at Philip and said, Philip, where shall we buy the bread? Do you think he said that? I don't think Jesus did. I think Jesus was probably hilarious. I think Jesus was probably the most joyous person and probably had the best jokes. He's God in the flesh. He's got to have some really good, quick, I mean, he's amazing. He must have been awesome to hang out with. They didn't accentuate that in these stories. I don't think he looked over and said, where shall we buy the bread? I think he looked over at Philip, and he said, hey, Philip, you know these people, how am I going to feed them? Right? They make the point to talk about the bread and the fish because that's part of the story. I tend to think outside the box when I read these things. They were writing about a real event that took place, and Jesus was like, what are we going to do with these people? You know what's funny about that is Jesus was messing with his head. Listen to what it says. He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Jesus knew he was going to do a miracle and feed all of these people. But he says to him, what are we going to do with these people? They're hungry. We've got to feed them. Listen to what Philip says. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. That's a lot of people. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? Interesting dialogue there. I don't, again, know if that's the conversation that happened. Maybe he says, well, this kid's got some food, but what are we going to do with that? Jesus knows the whole time along. Now, I think it may be a little more pointed because they're making a point of the story. But listen, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place. Again, I think about outside of Jerusalem. Where is all this grass? That is a question I have. There's not a lot of grass, I don't think, in that region, is there? A lot of rocks, a lot of sand. Evidently, wherever they were, there was plenty of grass. I don't think it's like a football field grass. Maybe it's clumps of grass, things they can sit on. I don't know. Things you have to go, All right. And the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over from those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet." Remember I said that this is a Jewish crowd? Why would they, surely this is the prophet? What were they saying? What were they thinking? They weren't calling him Messiah, but they were saying, you know, this is the prophet. This is like one from God for sure. But they use the word the. And that's interesting. This isn't just any old prophet. This is the prophet. This is somebody special. This is somebody that's starting something big. This is the prophet who's come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force. Who would do that? Who would make him king? King of what? King of the Jews. So obviously this is all Jewish people. This is Jewish happenings. This is stuff that's going on in and amongst them. He wanted, so they would try and make him king by force. He withdrew again into the hills by himself. A couple of things going on there, by the way. Jesus gets out of the way. He doesn't want them to try and make him king. By force. Isn't that a weird thing that he would mention? That he's going to make, they're going to grab him and try and make him king by force. Why would they have to do that? Why would they think that way? Remember that the Jewish nation was trying to do what? They wanted to overtake the Romans who had taken them over and were ruling over them, and they were looking for someone to take the reins and to rule and to take over the world, and all of a sudden who was going to be in charge? Jewish people. That's what they were looking for. That was never God's plan at all. When they read their scriptures, they read things about the fact that in the future, God would rule over them here in this land that they were promised, and that they would rule, and that they would be in charge. What they didn't understand was that it was not during this time where sin would still be in the world, but that God had to do things first in order to take care of sin and to bring in his kingdom. Right? All these things are going on during the story. And if you don't look at it from their standpoint and from the very promise that they were given and expecting, you would lose all of this. True? Matter of fact, all of it, a lot of it would just be confusing. This is why I think sometimes people say, "I can't read the Bible, it's too confusing." Amen, brother. He always has a good word for me. It's too confusing. I can't get it, blah, blah, blah. But we have to start to think beyond, because we think oftentimes that it's written directly to us. And it would be confusing if that were the case. It's not written directly to us. It's written directly about what was happening at the time, in this case to the Jews. And we can learn from that and understand the full story, and where it comes towards the end is what? The church age, in other words, this age we live in, which for the most part isn't in the Bible. You know that, right? Most of what we are living in now is not written in the Bible. It's more of a mystery. And yet there are things that help us to understand this time we live in. All right, let's keep going a little bit. Yes, so he withdrew, so they didn't try him, make him king by force. Now, when the evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got in a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It's I, don't be afraid." Now, we know this story, right? Jesus comes and he's walking on the water, and then he says, "Peter," because Peter says, "Hey, let me come out and get." Peter starts to walk, he sinks, and then Jesus calms everything once he gets in the boat. We know this, right? But listen to what this next phrase says, the next verse. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Wait a minute, isn't this the story we know about? Isn't this the story where all that other stuff happened? Why isn't it mentioned here? Any ideas? The Bible comes at many of these stories from different vantage points, saying different things, and this one just doesn't mention those facts. It's going on to something else. And so you have to understand, this is the same him walking on water. He didn't walk on water twice. It's not two different stories. It's not a mistake just because they didn't mention that. In the rendition that John's giving, he's like, that information is not something I need to talk about right now. Do you know that there are other miracles that Jesus did that aren't in the Bible anywhere? Did you know that there are things he said and did that aren't in the Bible anywhere? Why is that? It says the book would be too big for the world to even hold if it gave every little bit. And so what we do is we get the writer's understanding, his viewpoint, and what God was giving him at the time. And in this particular case, don't let it throw you, he just doesn't mention those other things. He talks about the fact that, boom, all of a sudden they were at shore. And it happened quickly. So this is from his standpoint. And that could be a miracle, or it could be just that, man, all this stuff went on and everything was happening, and the next thing I know, we're at shore. Why? Because Peter was walking on water, he's sinking into this, you know what I mean? So don't let it throw you. But all of a sudden, immediately they were where they were heading, at shore. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread, and after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi. What does the word rabbi mean? Teacher. Okay, so they're saying teacher. All right? They thought of him as a prophet. They thought of him as a teacher. They don't understand him as Messiah. But they know he's something special, and he's got some pretty powerful things going on. Teacher, when did you get here? Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, you are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and you had your fill. Do not work for the food that spoils, but for the food that endures to eternal life. Jesus here starts to get into a metaphor, but he's looking at them going, you guys are only here because of what? Because you got a meal out of me the other day. Because you saw this miraculous thing and you ate as much as you wanted to. You're like, this dude's pretty cool. We should hang out with him. If I were to be able to hang out with someone that could just provide as much lobster and butter as I wanted, they would be my friend immediately. Right? And this is what's going on. I want you to think about the time period that these people live in. Bread is a luxury. Okay, fish is a luxury. This is the stuff they're eating is not like everyday stuff. The stuff that they had, oftentimes they were muddling through and getting what they could have. Jesus obviously gave them so much that they couldn't eat anymore, and there was a bunch left over. And these people said, hey, guess what? We're in here for Passover. We got nothing else going on, and this guy's banging out the food left and right. Let's go follow him. So Jesus gets a little bit up, and he's like, listen, you shouldn't be looking for the food that just you eat and then it's gone. I want you to look for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Now, he says this. Do you think people get it? Ooh, he said something religious. Don't get it, but it means something. All right, let's keep listening. We do the same thing, don't we? Right? We hear a little bit, we start to learn, but we're like, okay, I get some of it. But what do? We go back to just kind of walking and doing our thing. We walk to the back of the plane looking for a door that's not there. Right? Don't we? Okay. Admitting that's a good thing. Understanding that about ourselves is a good thing, because the more we go, oh man, I just don't pay enough attention sometimes. Then next time we can do what? Maybe pay a little more attention and hear what God's saying. And again, amen. It's good. All right. All right, then they asked him, what must we do? What must we do to do the works that God requires? There's another human response. As soon as you start to talk about religion, people say, well, what should I do? Right? It's a do. I must do something. And Jesus wants them to get beyond the what must I do and start to understand what must I believe. What must I see? How must my eyes be open? I heard it said one time that, there's terrible stuff going on, and there was did anybody know a pastor? And this guy says, I'm a pastor. And the guy says, do something religious. So he took an offering. All right, well, I know, right? So Jesus answered, the word of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. Here it is. Stop trying to do. Understand. See the truth. God has done for you what you could not do. Remember the Old Testament. Thou shalt, thou shalt, thou shalt not, on and on, right? What did the Old Testament show us? How impossible it would be to do what God requires of us to do. And so here Jesus starts to bring it back around and say, what must I do? You must believe in the one he has sent. That was the message the whole time. Old Testament was to point us to the fact that we couldn't do it and we needed God to do it for us. That's it. Really is it. So they asked him, what miraculous sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? Here we are again. All right, we've done all this. Oh, you want us to believe in you? Do something for us. Okay, I've healed the sick. I fed you guys a bunch of stuff. You're out here because of what I have done, and yet you want more? It's not about what I do. It's about who I am. The only reason... Why did Jesus do the miracles that he did, by the way? In part, to love people, to heal, to help. But why did he do them? It was to verify who he was. To give credential, to show people and say, listen, I'm not just, some charlatan. I'm here for a very important thing. So what will you do? Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. What are we back to, by the way? Who were their forefathers? Jewish people. Eating manna in the desert. So who's he talking to? Who's talking back to him right now? Jewish nation. Jewish people. He's trying to give them the truth of what it is that they need as the Jewish nation. You need the Messiah. You need to be forgiven because of what has been done for you. Messiah will come, just as it was said in the Old Testament, that he would come and die to take away the sins of the world. That was true then, and it was true when he presented it to Jerusalem. They didn't get it. What must we do? What are you going to do? You're going to become king. You're going to take over the world, and then we can be in charge. And he's like, you guys aren't getting it. You're not getting it. And he kept trying to get it. So, Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, from now on, give us this bread, so we can take and eat it. And okay, it's something to do again. You're still not getting it. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. Again, so important. Those who really and truly start to understand what God wants will see Jesus for who he truly is, and they'll be drawn to him. And what did he also say? And whoever comes to me, I will what? Never drive away. Remember that he is the one not only that saves us, but he is the one that keeps us. And if people come to you and say, well, as a Christian, you must do this, this, and this, or you're not really a Christian. Really, what does that list look like? Could you tell me? Because if I'm really and truly a Christian, that means that I've understood who Jesus is and what he's done for me, and that he's forgiven me. He says he will never push me away, even when I'm in the worst of the worst in my soul. Have you ever been the worst of the worst? Have you ever been in your own way? Have you ever felt so miserable, and people come up, even like the cutest little kid would come up and you'd be like, get away from me, kid. You know? I mean, do we get there? And yet Jesus still what? Would never push us away. The time has slipped away, and I don't want to force the rest of this. So next week we'll be talking about the zombie apocalypse. The fact that Jesus talks about eat my flesh and drink my blood. But you can see where he's coming with this. And the people aren't getting it, and then all of a sudden what we're going to talk about next week is the fact that he gets real crazy because he starts to talk in a crazy way. And what's amazing is some people go, all right, I'm out. And they leave because it's like, woohoo, this guy's nuts. If you listen to the words he used, he sounded nuts. And I think he did it for a reason. Then some other people stuck around. And you got to hear their response. Why did they stick around? It's a beautiful thing. So, zombie apocalypse next week, 10:30. See you guys then, all right? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your love and your grace, and that your word is so true and powerful, and it is amazing. It's actually fun to look at and to really dig into and say, what was going on here? What would we have done if we were in this situation? Out in the middle of almost like a desert, away from the city, away from home, and someone starts getting a little crazy. What would we do? What would we hear? Father, we know now, for those of us who have accepted you, that your Holy Spirit lives in us. We hear your voice. We understand. Even when we get confused, we know what other choice would we have. You are life. And you are our only hope. And Father, because of that, we come to you, we thank you, and we ask that you give us your power and your life, even as we go through this life stumbling every step of the way. We thank you for what you do in and through us. And we can't wait to get home to see you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Have a great week.